In today's Warframe guide, I'm gonna show you the very best Warframes that we currently have in the game as of mid-2024. We'll go over how they work, where you can get them, and of course I'm also gonna provide some build examples for you, both an expensive endgame as well as a cheaper budget version. Also, I've already factored in what we know so far about the upcoming changes to enemy armor, so that this list will hopefully be up to date even in the future. As always, a massive shout out to all my generous channel members who help me keep the lights on. And now, let's jump right into it. Jumping right in with our manifold musketeer Mesa. I think it should come to nobody's surprise that Mesa of course makes the top 10 Warframe list. She has been in my top 10 last year, she is in my top 10 this year, and I think she'll probably also be in my top 10 for the next year. Mesa is just a really well-rounded Warframe with insane offensive capabilities, basically being able to nuke an entire room in no time, and at the same time she's also very tanky, making it possible to simply outlast pretty much every enemy, even up to elite Deep Archimedia. As you probably know, the main bread and butter about Mesa are of course her regulators, her exalted akimbo pistols, that have an insane fire rate that ramps up over time, all while at the same time infinite ammo, meaning you can really go ham with these ones. But not just that, she can also buff up the damage output of you and your allies' weapons, and at the same time, and this is the big one, her third skill gives you up to 95% damage reduction from everything that comes in, meaning if you pair that with adaptation, you get this extreme tankiness that I was talking about earlier. If you want a Warframe that's easy to play, can clear out entire rooms in a split second, all while at the same time being able to tank a lot of damage, then Mesa is definitely going to be your top girl. When it comes to building her, then Mesa is best modded for a healthy strength duration mix, all while at the same time not compromising too much on efficiency, because low efficiency can cost you a ton of energy with the regulators. As for the regulator build itself, this one is actually kind of a bit spicy. See, these pistols have an insane crit damage multiplier with a decent crit chance, however they lack in status chance. And the thing with Warframe is that if you're going up against those highly armored enemies in higher level content, you're pretty much forced to proc something to reduce the armor, or go for slash that bypasses the armor, which both requires you to have a decent amount of status chance, and Mesa doesn't have that. However, with the upcoming changes, this might be drastically different. See, in the last dev stream, the developers said that they want to hard cap enemy armor, making it so that in the future, even just partially stripping armor will be enough to deal decent amounts of damage to enemies. And I think this is going to be a great passive buff for Mesa, because even with a relatively low status chance, given enough fire rate, you will be able to deal enough corrosive procs to at least reduce the enemy armor by a bit, and that then will translate into meaningful amounts of damage increase for you. Now, if that sounds all nice and well for you and you want to get your own hands on your own Mesa, then the way to get her is get the main blueprint from the market, then craft the Mutalist Alad V keys in your foundry to access the Mutalist Alad V fight on Ares, and from him, as a drop, you get the component blueprints for Mesa to craft her herself, or you go for the Prime version right away. Spot number 2 on this list goes out to Dante, a very recent addition to the game, and that makes it actually quite interesting because in previous years' tier lists, usually the motto was old but gold, and the recently released Warframes didn't quite make it in the upper echelon. However, this time it's different and Dante is absolutely phenomenal. See, this scholar really has it all. I mean, if you want to go for whole slash-based room nukes, then look no further, you go for Dante. Even after his nerf, he is still an absolute powerhouse in this regard. If you want to make sure that your entire team cannot die because they have so much overguard and overguard regeneration at the same time, look no further, you go for Dante because he can do that. If you want to confuse the enemies while making them more vulnerable to your damage, go for Dante, he can do that. And at the same time, if you want to have an exalted weapon that is super duper powerful and deals tons of red crits, you guessed it, look no further, go for Dante because he can do that. But yeah, even in case you've never heard about Dante before at all, just the few tiny tidbits that I told you so far should be enough to convince you that Dante is an absolute king in Warframe 2024. These right here would be the builds, the one that I'm using in the video right now, and the more budget-friendly alternative for him. And if what I've said so far sounds convincing to you and you want to get your own hands on Dante, then what you need to do to acquire him is first complete the Whispers in the Walls quest, that is currently the latest main story quest of the game, so you need to be a bit further into the game to get your hands on him. Then, in addition, you gotta finish the Deadlock Protocol quest, which happens a bit earlier, so you probably already have that. And then, once both of these quests are finished, you go to the Disruption mission mission Armatas on Deimos, where you can get his components dropped as rewards. Alternatively, you can also use a resource called Vessel Capillaries, go to Lloyd in the Sanctum Anatomica, and use those to purchase the parts that you're still missing. Those Vessel Capillaries drop from the Demolisher units in that aforementioned Disruption mission. But so much about Dante, let's go on with the next Warframe on today's list, and that would be the lovely Lady Protea. Protea recently got her Prime release, and that also gave me the opportunity to spend some more time with her and work on a video about her. This video recently released and opened my eyes to how incredibly great Protea actually can be. So let's talk a little bit about this. Protea is one of 2 frames in the game currently that I personally would consider a quote-unquote perfect Warframe, with a well thought through kit that is very powerful, very fun to play, and also not completely brain dead, but active enough to keep you engaged. As it stands right now, Protea has 2 different playstyles. Her first and predominant one involves her auto turrets, the Blaze Artillery, which is her second skill, that deals massive heat damage to all the enemies around, and at the same time it constantly ramps up its own damage, meaning it has very great scaling potential even into higher enemy levels. But that's not the only playstyle, as I recently discovered, because you can also go for her first skill, which is like small grenades that you put on the floor, and they create an aura in which they stagger enemies and inflict slash damage and bleed status effects onto them. If you put enough strength on it, then those grenades absolutely have the capacity to nuke away even higher level Steel Path enemies. But what's even greater about this is, and why I think it's terribly underrated, is that enemies in the force field of those grenades get constantly stun locked, meaning they cannot run through that. This way, if you put down some of those grenades at the room entrances in a, let's say, defense mission, you will not only lock down the entire room and deny enemy access to it, but also, over time, all those enemies that are trying to get into the room will die from the slashes, so it also doesn't slow down the mission progress. When it comes to survivability, no problem. Protea is a great shield gator and also shield tank because she has alternative grenades on her first skill, which replenish your shields and give you additional shield gating time, so she can survive even into very high levels. And as if that's not enough, her third skill gives you the opportunity to constantly replenish your energy, making it that it's pretty much impossible to ever run out. If you agree to that, and you want to get her for yourself, then the main blueprint for her, you will get her from finishing the Deadlock Protocol quest, and then the component blueprints are dropped from the 3 different tiers of Gran and Void missions in the Corpus ship tile sets, you know, the ones that you access through those golden hands where you need to kill a certain amount of enemies, and after you've done that, you can craft Protea for yourself. And just by the way, if you could maybe drop a like for the video, that would be super amazing because it helps me big time out with the algorithm, so cheers so much for your awesome support. But now, let's go on to the next frame. Alright, so remember how I just said with Protea that I think there are 2 Warframes in the game right now that can be considered quote-unquote perfect? Well, let's now talk about the other one, which in my opinion would be Gauss. Gauss is super strong and absolutely phenomenal. He has a very well-rounded kit, focusing on speed and charging his personal battery, and then the charge of that personal battery will increase the strength of your other skills. For example, his third skill, Kinetic Plating, absorbs a ton of incoming damage from the most relevant damage types and converts that into energy for Gauss, meaning he's not really struggling with the juice. Then, if you want to, you can also go and room nuke with him, because with his skill Thermal Sunder, he can create an AoE aura of either heat or cold damage, but if you think that already sounds great, then we need to first take a look at his 4th skill, and hold your horses because this one makes everything even better. This skill is called Redline, and it allows you to supercharge your battery, so to speak. Once that battery level is reached, you become completely invincible against all the incoming damage that the Kinetic Plating blocks off. Your Thermal Sunder deals even more damage to the enemies, and so much more. I don't want to go too much into the details right now because Gauss is a little bit more complex than your standard day-to-day Warframe, and if you want to know everything, you better take a look at my dedicated Gauss guide for that. But I hope that this little snippet that I've showed you so far is enough to convince you that Gauss is definitely worth looking into more. Now, before we go on to the next frame, I want to take another second to go back to the aforementioned changes to enemy armor and different elements that are coming up in the next big update, because I think Gauss is one of the Warframes that passively will benefit greatly from those changes. With Thermal Sunder, Gauss can create an AoE heat or cold aura. Given the fact that enemy armor is going to be hard capped, that means that the status effect of heat, cutting enemy armor into half, will be much more useful in the future than it is right now, where we, let's be honest, barely feel the effect of it. So Gauss, with his Thermal Sunder big AoE heat aura, will noticeably debuff armored enemies around him. And at the same time, the developers also said that they want to further buff the cold status effect, making it that enemies can be permanently frozen, and at the same time, they will take even more crit damage when they're frozen. I'm already super curious to try Gauss out once those changes have come into effect. And if you, understandably, now want to have Gauss for yourself, then you get the main blueprint directly from the market and the components from the disruption mission Kappa on Sedna. Up next, we have Gauss's Sedna sister Saren. Wow, I'm really going strong with the alliterations in this one. But yeah, just like Gauss, Saren also comes from Sedna because her component blueprints come from the Kayla the Thame boss fight. And yeah, I don't think I need to say all too much about Saren because pretty much most of the community knows that she is disgusting in how strong she is against pretty much every enemy out there. See, Saren is one of the best weapon buffing platforms in the entire game, while at the same time being able to casually room nuke as well. With her 4th skill, she can spread viral in the entire room, which is nice because that means enemies take more damage from you. Then her 3 Toxic Lash is incredibly busted because it gives you a big toxin damage bonus to your weapons, which has some funny shenanigans going on because it is on the one hand considered weapon damage, but on the other hand, it's not interfering with your elemental constellation on your weapon, meaning that it's kind of possible to get quadratic scaling out of this. Oh yeah, and did I mention that with her 1st skill, she can spread room-wide corrosive status effects, basically being able to strip away enemy armor, and with an augment being able to at the same time give herself corrosive infusion on her weapons, next to the toxin infusion that she also gets, making it that, as you also see in the background, it is just absurd which numbers you're able to deal with pretty much any weapon when you run Saren. In terms of survivability, you can definitely build her into a more tanky playstyle, but if you want to go in the really high levels, then Saren also has a great opportunity for you to shield gate with her 2nd skill that is tailor-made for exactly that. All in all, Saren is not only a very, very strong Warframe, but also very versatile, can be used in many different scenarios and many different enemy ranges, and after investing some more time into her for this video, I decided that I just must give you a dedicated Saren guide on my channel here in the future, so if you don't want to miss out on that, day one, you might want to consider leaving the channel a sub, but for now, let's go on to the next Warframe on our list, which is also an absolute boss girl. Meaning, of course, Wisp. Wisp is, and pretty much has always been, an absolute favorite in the community. And I totally see why. I mean, she does have quite the features now, doesn't she? But yeah, aside of her obvious physical appearance, Wisp also packs an insane punch. She is basically untouchable for enemies because she's considered invisible whenever she's in the air, and at the same time, if you double tap her 2nd skill, that gives you a 3-second invulnerability time frame, working kind of like a shield gate. So yeah, if you want to go up against really strong enemies that deal too much damage to out-tank it, then Wisp is already a great option simply from a survivability standpoint. But however, that is not all. She, at the same time, is a great team player because she can dish out multiple different very helpful buffs to herself and the team, and when it comes to damage output, she still has her 3rd skill, Breach Surge, which not only blinds enemies, making it impossible for them to really attack you, but also creates a very powerful chain reaction of homing projectiles that can empty out whole rooms full of enemies. This right here would be the build that I'm running in the background. This right here is the more budget-friendly approach, and one more tip from my side. If you want to play Wisp, try to go for a weapon that deals a lot of damage with one shot, because that will make it that the sparks from Breach Surge will deal even crazier amounts of damage. To get your hands on Wisp, you gotta go to Jupiter and fight the Ropa Law list, where you can get the components as well as the main blueprint for her. Another frame that I consider more than worth it would be number 7 on today's list, and that is Harrow. I know, Harrow is kind of the meme frame, kind of the copium frame, and I'm totally aware of that, but this doesn't stop me from playing him because he is an absolute menace. Harrow is a Warframe that pretty much has it all. He can give himself shield regeneration, health regeneration, massive fire rate and attack speed bonuses, energy regeneration, and of course, there are the red crits. Now, you might want to say he doesn't only give all of that to himself, but also to the entire team. You didn't mention that, Blacky, right? Well, here's the thing, and that is also the reason why I don't consider him to be a quote-unquote perfect Warframe, even though he kind of sounds like he is, And that is that on the one hand, he is intended to be that insane team buffer, but on the other side, it kinda doesn't work in group play, because in order to be able to dish out all those buffs to the team, Harrow needs to do a lot himself. He needs to eat damage himself to buff the crit. He needs to kill himself to buff the energy, and so on and so forth. This might have been very viable when Harrow came out back in the day, but as it stands right now, room nuking is easier than ever, and Harrow has a hard time when playing with others. It simply becomes a bit challenging to do enough in order to get all those buffs to their maximum potential. So yeah, if you want to play in a team and you want to buff the team, then Harrow is probably not the greatest option, even though he appears to be on paper. However, if you are a solo player, then there is hardly any other frame out there that I could recommend more to you. And speaking of the group play, if you want to play Harrow and you would like to play in a group, then my recommendation would be use Citrine instead. She kinda does the same thing as Harrow, you know, health, energy, shield regeneration, red crits, all that good stuff. She's not as great at it as Harrow is, but the way she does it is more synergistic with team play, so if you're going in a group, then Citrine is the better Harrow. And if you now want to get Harrow for yourself, then my recommendation is simply get the Prime version, because the normal version is an absolute pain to acquire. Here's why. To get the main blueprint, you're gonna finish the Chains of Harrow quest. Then the chassis are dropped from Void Fissure enemies, you probably have a ton of those already. The Neuroptics can be a reward from the Kuva spy mission, and the systems are dropped in faction missions. Also, Neuroptics and systems can be acquired as a reward from the Kuva survival missions too. So yeah, really, just go for the Prime. Next, Zephyr. I'm going to try to keep this one a bit shorter. She is great because she can pretty much make herself invincible against projectile weapons, which is kinda 90% of the damage that you're ever gonna take. She can group up enemies and put them in her tornadoes, where you can apply crazy amounts of different status effects to them. You're just gonna end up nuking away everything that is caught in your tornadoes, and it's extremely fun to play. It's straightforward, and as you see, it is also super duper strong. No matter if you're just doing normal steel path or you go circuit into the really high thousands of enemy level range, Zephyr has got you covered. And also, especially for defense type missions like excavation, mobile defense or normal defense, Zephyr has this great quality that if she stands on top of the defense target, no enemy fire can touch it, because her invincibility aura that she has a bit of a range, and that is usually big enough to cover the entire defense target, as well as, of course, if you like, nearby teammates too. Right here, we would have my more quote-unquote end game and the more budget-friendly build. And if you want to get Zephyr for yourself, that's actually pretty simple. All you need to do is go to the Tenno lab of your clan dojo, and there you will find all the blueprints that you'll need for her. Up next, we have another Warframe who's pretty much destined to be a permanent guest on any top Warframe list out there, and that would be our lovely Eidolon Frame Revenant. I know, you're probably rolling your eyes already, and I totally get that, but on the other side, he is so powerful that it would simply be wrong to not put him in the top 10 list. See, in case you're new to the game, or you've lived under a rock for the last couple of years, Revenant is the literal most survivable frame in the entire game. His second ability, Mesmer Skin, gives you a number of sort of free hits that you can take without taking damage. And those charges, those free hits, don't care about how much damage that hit would have actually done. Meaning, if you have enough energy to constantly recast it if the number goes low, Revenant can theoretically tank infinite amounts of damage even from the highest level cap, level 10,000 enemies, which is something that most other frames simply can't. Now, sure, he does have this reputation of being a boring frame because all he seems to ever do is simply not dying and that's it, but I think that does him a disservice, and here's what I mean. While yes, Revenant is the most unkillable Warframe in the game, he is also a nice weapons platform. With the augment for his first skill, for every enemy that you turn into a thrall, you get more damage for your weapon. That can ramp up quite a bit, and it is noticeable. And then, and this is in my opinion a very underrated playstyle, we have his third ability, which is one of the very few skills in the game that deals percentage-based damage to the enemy, meaning no matter how much health they have, they always lose the same portion. And just by the way, if you build it right, you can make it that this portion is 100%, making it theoretically possible that Revenant clears entire rooms in just one hit per enemy, even if the enemy is of level 10,000. I mean, being able to survive level 10,000 with ease, all while at the same time being able to kill level 10,000 with ease, that is a combination that you don't find on all that many Warframes out there. These right here would be the builds, but I also plan to give you an updated, dedicated Revenant 2024 guide here soon, so definitely stay tuned for that. If you want to get Revenant for yourself, then the main blueprint comes from the Mask of the Revenant quest, which you can start in Cetus if I'm not mistaken, and then the component blueprints are dropped as rewards from Plains of Eidolon bounties. Now, before we get to the last frame on today's list, I want to give you some honorable mentions that are very, very good, but that didn't quite make it to the list for various reasons. However, I still think they deserve to be mentioned. Those being, for example, Cora. Cora is a fan favorite in the game. She can lock down entire rooms with her Strangle Dome, get more loot out of strangled enemies, pull them together with her grouping skill, and at the same time she can also deal massive damage to all the enemies caught in her AoE dome. The reason why I didn't put her on today's list is that her strength very much comes from the fact that she needs to be equipped with a decent pseudo-exalted weapon. And at many occasions already, the devs have stated that they really dislike the mechanic of pseudo-exalted weapons and that it's kinda unintended. So yeah, this planned rework of pseudo-exalted weapons might end up being not too bad after all for frames that rely on it, but it could also turn out to be detrimental, making all those frames which do use pseudo-exalteds much weaker than before. This is why at this point in time, I kinda wanna keep my hands off of Cora and wait for whatever update may come in the future to actually take a closer look at her. Then, up next, we have Hydroid. He not too long ago received a rework, making him very, very strong. However, the reason why I didn't put him on today's list is that he pretty much now does the same thing that Saren does, and I feel Saren just does it a little bit better. Up next, we have a very surprising entry, and that would be Frost. See, Frost has a dedicated fanbase, but I'm pretty sure that everybody would agree that he has never really been a top-tier Warframe. But with the upcoming changes to enemy armor scaling and especially the improvement of cold status effects, Frost will massively be buffed by those changes. I'm not quite sure whether this will make him a top 10 Warframe, we will have to figure that out, but it should be said that he will receive a definite boost. And just by the way, when those changes come into effect, I'm planning to make a dedicated video where I go over all the Warframes in the game and talk about how they will be positively or negatively affected by those changes, so that you get all the information that you need for your favorite Warframes. If you don't want to miss out on that video, day one, then you might want to consider maybe leaving the channel a sub. But now, let's finally go on to the last frame on today's list. And that would be Octavia. I know, old but gold, not a big surprise right here, but she is still very strong. See, Octavia unites something that also kind of Revenant does. She can be constantly invisible, meaning that enemies have a hard time even targeting her, and at the same time she can nuke entire rooms with scaling damage, meaning that even against the highest level enemies in the game, her time to kill doesn't look all too different than at level 1. The biggest downside to her really is the fact that she's extremely boring to play. All you really need to do to play her to her maximum potential is make sure your skills are on all the time and spam the living heck out of your crouch button, and that is pretty much it. If you want a Warframe that is exciting to play, then definitely look somewhere else, but if you want one that simply packs a punch and combines many different qualities, then even though I personally don't like her all too much, Octavia is still objectively one of the strongest frames in the game, which is also why she's on today's list. These right here would be the builds, and if you want to get Octavia for yourself, then the main blueprint comes from the Octavia's Anthem quest, which you need to finish to get it. Then her chassis are dropped from the Lua music puzzle, her neuroptics come from Rotation C in the defense mission Terrorum on Deimos, and her systems can be acquired by finding those hidden caches in the Crossfire Exterminate mission Plato on Lua. If you want to hear my personal opinion, screw the normal version and just go for the Prime right away. And in case you don't have all the inventory space yet for so many different Warframes, then definitely check out this video right here on the only few Warframes any account will ever truly need. Another big shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nos Linux Gaming, Lycan Shepherd, Turtlepeer, Shadow Soul, JPT Kochman, Pepperwolf, Ondakani02, Misfire EX, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. As you see this video, I am currently on vacation, so we see each other at the end of next week hopefully, and until then, as always, good loot.